All right, so for this next one, what we need, and let me kind of show you, we want to be able to create a laser to be able to shoot stuff, okay, or a missile. So we're going to have to go through and refactor code a little bit, but we need to design this object, this missile object, so that we can fire it. We need to control the timing of it. I don't want to be able to hold the keys. See, I'm just holding it, and it's still firing. But it's controlling the timing of it because I don't want to be able to spam the key. So let's start setting that up. Okay, we need to think of the spaceship, and first let's refactor because we called it laser before. And really this is kind of a projectile that we're firing. And now it's going to operate the same, but let's just replace that. All right, so we want to fire this missile. Okay, so let's design this. It's going to be very, very similar to our spaceship. It's going to be very, very similar to our asteroid object that we created. So that's ultimately what we're going to do. We need to create one, and since it's going to be kind of a part of the spaceship's going to be responsible for it, I need to create it first. Okay, so the missile is going to have many of the same qualities that all the other ones had. It has a position, so let's call create vector. Oops. It's going to have a velocity, the speed at which we can fire it at. Create vector. And let's just put this as, it's going to go straight up and down. Let's do a speed of -10. For how fast it goes, we may have to tweak this. It is going to have a size, so let's do that also as a vector. For our collisions, we're just going to do the X part since it's going to be a circle. So let's do 10, 10. Okay, now our missile, we only want to update it, we only want to display it, we only want to check for collisions if it has been fired. So we need to have basically a Boolean switch to go on and off for if we are able to fire it. Once it's hit something, then technically we could refire. So all of that stuff, we need to kind of track some things. So let's do a is fired, and we'll set that to false. And then let's do a we want some type of countdown timer, or like a cooldown timer. So let's say we're going to start that at, and we'll think of it in terms of milliseconds. 1,000 milliseconds is a 1 second. So if I want it to be, roughly every second, then I'm going to have a cooldown of a second. And so then I do want to have, for this missile, if I was going to end up having multiple of them, each missile is going to have to track its own fire start time. So let's do start time, and then end time is going to be what the current time is minus the start time. So that would be the duration that we're looking for. So start time is going to be now we're going to put this as null right now, but when we fire it, that's when when we reset it, that's when we want to set the start time to whatever that current time is, etc. Okay, so that's probably good for right now. Let's start thinking of the different functions that we need. Now this is going to be very, very similar to our spaceship and our asteroid. We need to have some type of update. And the update is going to be only if it has been fired. So if this dot is fired, if that's true, then I'm going to go ahead and do an update, which we want to update the position based off the velocity. So it'd be this dot position dot add this dot velocity. And then we want to check in our update if we are off the screen, we want to reset. We could use the asteroid one, but really our lasers are going to be firing from our spaceship straight up, and so if it's off the screen up here, then that's all that we got to really check. We just got to check that it's basically off the screen. So I'm going to just check if this dot position dot y plus this dot size dot, and since we're doing our collision box pieces, I'm going to just do because I want to stretch it like a laser, like what we had here, and we were playing around with that based off of changing that length. So let's check that then. The y position plus that y, we want that to elongate. So as long as that is less than 0, then we could reset. So this dot reset, which we haven't written yet. Okay, in terms of update, after we fired it, we're changing our position. We also want to check for collisions. So we'll do this dot check collision. And we want to pass in an asteroid to check. But I don't want my update to be called in that loop. We are going to have actually we need a couple more things. We're going to have a check collision in here, and we're going to have like the thing to check. So instead of passing in an asteroid each time, we're going to need to do that in one spot. So let's do about object to check. There's a couple different ways that we could do this. We'll put it as null. Null really means the absence of a value. Okay, it's not 0. It's just there is no value. So I can actually use that to check. If I have no value, then I can do it. So if we have something that we're calling like that object to check is basically going to be an object, then we should probably have a function that's going to be like load object to check. So let's do that. Load object to check. And we want to pass in that object. And then it's going to be this dot object to check is that object. Okay. So then when we're updating our position after it's been fired. We want to check collision for the object to check. So we can go through all of that list only if we have an object to check. So I can say check collision against this object to check. We may have to tweak this some. Okay. So we're going to check if we've been fired, and then we change our position. And we check for collisions. If we're off the screen, we're going to reset. That looks pretty good. All right, so thinking about those things, we do want to have a reset. We do want to have a display. We do want to have a check collision. And we do want to kind of have an actual fired mechanic for the missile. So once the missile has been fired, we should have a fire position where it fired from. So let's kind of write those. I'm going to write the display first. The display is going to be displaying the position of the missile. I'm going to do this inside of push pop. And again, we don't need to worry about displaying the missile at all if it has not been fired. So if this dot is fired, that's my Boolean check. If that is true, then I can display. So I'm going to basically ignore it if it's not. So that means that it's not been fired. I don't need to update it. I don't need to display it. Okay, so if it has been fired, then let's translate our position to whatever our current position of our object is. That's this dot position.x, this dot position.y. And then we are drawing, let's say for right now, let's draw like a green circle. So how about fill 0, 255, 0. That's going to be our missile color, and then we can change it later. So we're going to fill it green, and we're using just the X for our collision kind of box. So this would be 0, 0, because we're not shifted at all from this translate point. And then we have our size. Okay. So that update and that display is happening. All right. Now, so we can kind of minimize these. we need a check collision, and we need a reset. So let's do a check collision. And in this case, because we already had that loaded load object to check, we don't need to pass it in there. So this is going to be very, very similar to the spaceship on how we reset. So let's look at how we did the spaceship, because we're going to copy and modify. Right here. This is how we're going to kind of do it. Now in this one, we were passing an asteroid. The missile is going to just hold on to what it's going to check. So this is basically the code that we want to kind of modify. So we have the missile. We're going to be checking if there is a collision, and it's not going to be a spaceship.position. It's a this.position, this.size.x. This would be the this.object to check dot position, and this.object to check dot size. There is no health for a missile. We're resetting that object, this.object to check, and we're going to reset our missile. Okay, I like that. So our update is going to be controlling that, checking the collision. What else do we need? Now we need a reset. So a reset, which is going to mean that our fired is going to be false. So this dot is fired is going to be false. And then when we fire the missile, that's when we're changing our position. So as long as we are changing this, then our update, this would no longer display any of this stuff, and then our display would no longer display. So then technically, when we are firing it, that's when we'll change our position. Okay, so we do need another one. I might here also change my start time back to null. So this dot start time is null. Okay. Let's do another one where we are actually saying fired. Okay, so we fired the missile. What happens when we fire the missile? We need to know the location of where it was fired from. So this ultimately should be the method that is getting used from the spaceship to actually fire the missile. That way we can pass the origin of the spaceship. So let's call it origin object. So our position, our position of our missile is going to be set by the origin object's position. So that would be position.x, and the origin object's position.y. And we may end up, giving that some type of offset right here. Let's just leave it right now like this. We'll set the fired. So this dot is fired is now true. If that's fired, that's when we want to give it a position to check for. Okay, so that might be fine. All right, so this right here, the fired, let's go into our control ship. Our control ship, we have this fire missiles right here. This is where we want to fire that missile. This could be our timer. We can look at the timers of everything. So let's say we do not want to be able to fire if the missile has already been fired. Let's rechange it. So fire missile. If missile dot is fired, if that is false, then we could fire a missile, and that would be missile dot fire, right? fired. And then we got to pass in our actual object. In this case, we are firing the missile from the spaceship. So this is referring to the spaceship. So that's giving us the origin of our object, which would be switching the is fired to true, and then we would not be refiring again. Okay, so this fire missile, though, is going to be part of our control ship. So we have for left, right, up and down. Now in here, we already got notes for stub and code. We need to check if that space bar is pressed. Space bar is 32 on the key code. So let's look at that one. So if key is down 32, if that's true, then we can fire the missile. So that'd be this dot fire missile. Fire missile, which is going to fire this. Okay. Now, once we have this, we fired the missile. It's not automatically going to call that update or the display because that's part of the missile. So if we fired the missile and we already have where it's going to be checking for those things, let's plug this into the display and plug this into the update. Okay. So we're updating the position, and I see that this is also not great code. We're going to refactor this too because we're dealing with vectors. It's actually this dot position dot add this dot velocity. Okay. If we fired the missile, we should be able to check for it. Okay, so we have a missile. Let's check missile dot update. Now, if it hasn't been fired, it's just going to push us out of this. I'm going to have the missile also be displayed, but I want it to be displayed underneath the spaceship, so it's like it's firing from below it. So we also will do missile dot display. Now let's go ahead and run to see if we got some stuff or if we errored out code. Oop, we errored out code. Cannot properties of undefined at sketch 49. Let's read that. So I press spacebar. We don't have a collision yet. Okay, so we got to pass in an object to check right there because it doesn't understand that. Okay, so I think we want to put that in here. The missile is going to be checking off of each one. Okay, so let's double check the missile. We want to call this code load object to check and then whatever that is. So it's going to load it and then it's going to run and reset if we need to. Load object to check. So let's do that here. We're going to do missile dot load object to check, and we're going to add that temp aster for the temp asteroid. Let's try. Oh, 149. We should have, as long as I'm calling this right, we should have an object to check. The object let's make sure I'm spelling it right. Okay, we're adding that. Okay, here's the thing. The check collision, let's see where we're at. I think that's part of the issue is in the update. If it's been fired, so let's check console.log this dot load object to check. I think as soon as I press space, we have 1. Maybe this won't work. Maybe we got to pass in that list of asteroids and just check each one. Let's do that then. Let's, instead of doing here, let's just pass in all of those. So we'll just pass in, I don't even think we need this. Okay, we'll pass in the objects right directly in here. So let's just modify this, objects. So we'll just do our for of loop inside this. So this is all going to go inside of that for of loop. So let's do let temp object of objects and then we'll just rename temp objects, temp object, and temp object. The key that we're trying to do is we're trying not to make it where it's tightly rolled up with each other, which will make it harder for it to rewrite. So this check collision, that only happens in the update, but we're going to have to pass the objects in at some point. Okay, so we do want the objects to check. Objects to check is null, and then load objects. We do want this objects to check. Actually, this is going to be objects. This object to check is objects. Okay. So then when we, okay, so our missile, the load objects to check, that's going to be our asteroids. So we're going to do that after we do the asteroid. So here's our asteroids. We finished the asteroids for every single one. We've pushed every single asteroid. We're going to missile dot objects to check asteroids. Objects is not defined. Love getting errors. Log objects. Length. Okay, it did 10, but it looks like we're still loading. Oh, do I still have it here? We don't need to do this multiple times. We already did it once. Hmm. 33. That's not defined. This is actually called object to check. BJS to check. Okay. Love it. 51. Never passed in that. This would be the object to check. OBJS to check. $51. Where are we checking for that collision? Already have it. Okay, so really what we got to do is we got to try to narrow down where the error occurred, because as we get more and more complex, we're going to end up having these issues. So we do have, it is holding that, those list of objects. Let's set that as a static array. I wonder if that's causing issues. It is. Because we didn't have it as an empty array when we loaded, it was freaking out. So now it's setting memory-wise. All right, so now we're able to fire when I hit the space bar. It's firing as soon as it goes off the screen, it's firing. So this is firing faster than us being off. We're not actually checking for collisions yet, though, which is what we're going to have to kind of fix for. That is kind of working. All right. As long as we've been fired, we're checking for collision, and then we're resetting our position. We're doing that. Check collision. Let's double check here. Console.log. Hit. Updates. Doesn't seem like it's happening that often. Objects to check. There is no this dot because we are temporarily signing it. Okay. It should fix it. So this is going to go through each one. Console.log temp object.position.x. Just see what some values are. Okay. that's not firing. It's fired. Okay. I haven't figured out the area yet, but all right, so let's just track through. We have set our position. We're saying that it is fired. We're setting our is fired position to false. When we are, so we're updating the position, but that's only if it's been fired. We're displaying the missile if it's only been fired. We fire it. We're saying only if this has not been fired are we firing it. And we're giving it that position, and that is based off of the space bar. So we got those pieces right there. That is working. And then when we reset, so let's see, console.log, reset. Okay, so we're seeing that happen. We are getting here. The objects to check should not change. The only thing I can think of is that there might be an issue with us loading it. Objects to check right there. So load objects to check. Thought we changed the name. We had name issues. 159. Not this, it's just temp object. Whatever one we passed in. Okay, that was fun. Okay, so now we need to put a timer on it or something. So once it's been fired, that should be the timer that we are checking for our missiles to make sure that we are not firing too fast. Okay, so when we fire the missile, that's when we want to do our start time, which would be in the spaceship. So when the spaceship is firing it, it's not been fired, we are firing it, and missile dot start time equals millis. Okay, so in here, this is now giving us the start time, and then we can do for the missile itself inside of the update, that's when we want to be able to. So we are checking that it's been fired, and then we're updating the position and checking collision. Now we want to also check for this. We are going to reset that missile. We could give it like a lifespan. We could check. We could also play with that timer so that we can't fire again. Now, if we don't want it to fire again, that's the spaceship. But if we want to give it a life cycle, we could do it somewhere in here where we're also resetting. So I'm going to go back to the spaceship, and when we are doing the it has not been fired, and let's say or, so let's say that it has been fired and I want to fire another one. So we could do or, let's do let duration is equal to millis minus missile dot start time. That's going to give me some timer. So if the duration is greater than the missile dot cooldown, then I should be able to fire again. So either I have not fired, or we are over the cooldown period. I could fire again. Now let's watch what happens. Okay, they don't like the name duration, so we're going to do about missile duration. Missile duration, that should be better. Okay, so now to see that working, if I move out of here, I should be able to it's still firing a lot faster than what we need, so we need to just make a couple tweaks. Our missile duration, that's 1,000 milliseconds. Let's say 250 milliseconds, just so we can see this working. I can fire faster, or we hit and then I can fire. Okay, so I can tweak this to maybe I want it to have a certain time. Rerun. So it's not going quite off the screen before I hit that 500 milliseconds, so that'd be a half second. Or I hit and then I can immediately fire. So if I'm really close, now I could also make it so that maybe I'm only able to do it within that cooldown, regardless if I'm really close to an object or not. So you guys can kind of play around with these values to really get the mechanics of your game of how you want to be able to do it. I could also set this up as maybe we have a missile and this is our kind of like designed for a missile, but the spaceship itself, maybe it only has 3 missiles. So then I'm checking the cooldown for each one of them, and I can only fire one at a time to play with that. So that would be really the code of what we did for a missile. The missile has a lot of the same values, except we have some Boolean things that we're starting to track. And when we reset our missile, we need to reset our start times and change that Boolean flag. The Boolean flag for if it's been fired or not is inside of our update in our display, so it's only doing the processing when it has been fired. Otherwise, we're not slowing down the code by continually checking. And then in this case, we just passed in that list of all the enemies that we could possibly check. There's multiple different ways that we could do this. The spaceship itself could have some type of radar that is looking at all of the stuff in the vicinity, and then would have the laser check against those items only. Okay, that's it for this video, for this walkthrough. The next thing that we would probably do is to really pull all our collision code pieces so that we don't need to see the actual hitboxes, and to add sound effects and to actually design the laser look. All right, good luck, have fun.